Is The Last of Us Remake worth your cash? What if you already own the remaster? What if you never played it? I'll answer those questions and more in today's review for The Last of Us Remake from Naughty Dog. The game comes out soon, remade from the ground up for the PS5, and releases sometime in the future for the PC. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, maybe subscribe. And make sure to share the video, and I'd like to know in the comment section if you plan on getting this. Or, well, anything this week. Well, the game's always been known as a graphical masterpiece. We're going to jump into the gameplay first. Last of Us is an action-adventure game. It's got a ton of up-close combat, ranged battles with all sorts of weapons, and a sprawling story that set off a sequel, a TV show, and, well, a remaster and a remake. In 2013, the United States, and probably Joe Rogan, is devastated by an epidemic of mutated mushroom fungus, which turns its human hosts into violent monsters known as the infected. Basically, zombies, with each kind having their own abilities and weaknesses, depending on how long they've stuck around in the game world. And this allows the game to be very flexible with the infected. For example, you'll run into close-to-human versions, shambling around backyards, just apparently stuck in eternal loops, looking for car keys and old dogs and people to kill, to long-term bloated fungus spitters that are huge, nasty, and resemble the Elephant Man on steroids. The world goes to crap right in front of Joel, and after a brief time seeing the world fall apart, the game jumps forward in time as Joel takes on a mission reluctantly with a friend, and that mission turns into everything he didn't expect. The game's about 15 hours plus a couple hours for the DLC and walks you through the collapsed grandeur of a society that's easily toppled and what people would do for themselves and do for others if that happened. And that's one reason The Last of Us has always worked. You see, Joel is the basic badass dad. Everyone thinks is sort of scary, rough, and cool until he kills all the other parents at the party because they wrap presents wrong. He's surly, he's angry, he's mean-spirited, and then when he doesn't get his way, he still gets his way because while everybody's in a discussion about it, he's already doing it his way. While the disease has wiped out most of the human civilization off the planet, Joel, his friend, and Ellie, his charge, is a girl that he needs to transport across the city, and they run into all types of people and creatures left over. Abandoned homes are there to be searched. They yield all kinds of items for crafting weapons like explosive nail grenades, and screwdriver shivs for easy dispatching of any survivors that have taken up residence outside the quarantine zones, as well as taking on nomadic bands that search the dangerous areas for easy picking. As a third-person action game, it's all about that mixture of stealth shooting and searching environments, the three cornerstones of a good game. You hoover up every item that you can find and hose down enemies with an assortment of weapons from shotguns to shivs, healing with a hot power of hatred in the form of Molotov cocktails. Now, if Joel isn't smashing somebody's face into the edge of a desk, he's driving through them or stabbing them or choking them or pretending to give up only to never give in, and that works on the infected as well, which is a huge bonus for the stealth and silent takedowns because the enemies in some forms can be choked out. Otherwise, Joel's white belt in jiu-jitsu would be pretty useless. Speaking of useless, as many of the weapons feel useless in the starting, stick with them because you can upgrade them. They become very powerful. The ability to fire much faster, larger clips and magazines, and just being able to carry more of whatever particular item it is. Everything is done in-game though, so if you want to sit down to a table to repair a handgun, expect to see a small detail like a bullet in the chamber that's left over ejecting onto the floor before Joel takes the gun apart to repair it. The same goes for the active inventory, with him rummaging through his bag as the battle and enemies continue around you. The Last of Us is almost masterful in the way it merges mechanics with movement or the continuation of it, lending threat to those places where other games may not actually have it, meaning that cutscenes can be moments of learning or interludes disturbed by some pretty damned huge events. It's always surprising, but the biggest surprise is that the best parts of the story aren't just those cutscenes, which are excellent. They're the story elements that blend everything together, showing Joel and Ellie for what they are, regardless of what you're doing in the third-person action-adventure parts. And seeing that Joel's someone lost, Ellie's someone going somewhere, and for the brief experience of these two together, they sort of function as one. And for just a little bit of time, Joel feels like he's headed towards a particular goal. Luckily, the control is very well done with gyro aiming if you want it, but if you don't, you can hide behind items, sneak up behind enemies to shiv them or choke them out, as I said, and move through the environment using Joel's nom vision to see around the world where enemies are. It's actually hearing and reflects Joel's life as the world's scariest gardener, pulling up weeds and mushrooms wherever they grow, taking each one of these enemies out. But you also have Ellie's help because she isn't necessarily useless, and in some elements and some moments she can take out enemies herself. A lot of times though, you'll be pushing her to the wayside as you take on a particular moment and you try to get through a spot and help her continue through the game world. When it comes to the controls, they've made huge accessibility improvements here. Be prepared for it. alternative controls, button presses versus holds, magnification of the screen for people with visual issues, as well as visual prompts for high contrast display, and changes to the HUD itself. They have motion sickness adjustments like camera distance, field of view, turning off the shake and blur. You have a ledge guard system, navigation that helps you to skip puzzles, as well as enhanced listen modes for all of the different systems. One of the best being that you can actually hear the subtitles and how they're spoken and their inflection. There's even more in the gameplay section. Combat accessibility options like allies not even getting grabbed by enemies, turning up or down the enemy's changes and perception and alertness, and much more. There's a lot here. When it comes to hearing, there are audio sound effect adjustments that you can make for items and pickups, as well as that subtitle part that I talked about. But the game didn't come out completely improved. I had a larger number of bugs in this title than I did in the remaster and the original. Joel many times would be killed by invisible enemies, or following and moving characters would get stuck in the geometry, ceiling, walls, and in particular doorways. Like they just were so depressed they didn't want to continue moving forward. This happened in the original once or twice, but it seems to be much more prevalent here. Regardless of those things, with the accessibility, what you do get is the tried and true The Last of Us gameplay. And if that's something you like, a lot of that is here, with many improvements when it comes to accessibility. Let's talk about the presentation, because that's a big part of this. A couple things to remember. Where the remaster was updating the graphics in general to the PS5, including higher resolution assets and work in some places, the remake is remaking the lighting systems, the AI systems, and how it works and follows and attacks characters, the cutscenes, pretty much everything being built somewhat from the ground up. Just to get that out of the way, I want to point it out. Now, graphically, the biggest step is emotion in the characters and enemies' faces. This is probably because the game already looked good. But when you've put your first person into a UFC neck choke, you can actually see them panicking, and it is incredibly clear. This is also mimicked on all the main characters in any of the cutscenes moment. It sort of builds up with you noticing it looks different, then more in depth when you continually play the game, and just realizing more and more of the jump here, in particular for faces. You can choose between the game's fidelity mode, which is targeted at around 30 FPS and 4K, or the performance mode, which is targeted at 60 FPS with a dynamic resolution. And I have to say 60 is for sure the way to go here. While some things within the game aren't impacted by the fidelity system's 30 FPS, no amount of fidgeting in the controls or options really made 30 feel smooth to me. All this remaking of the character models, locations, and otherwise has an excellent payoff, but it also has some surprisingly odd results. But that doesn't offset things like the big changes. For example, the locations. A lot of them are not just touched up rooms graphically when it comes to the fidelity as well, but also the locations themselves have a ton of debris in them, and many times changes to the architecture. Whether that's good or bad and you like that look differently, or you like the more cluttered locations differently, I thought it was a big step up in a lot of places. But I can't not point out some of these issues, like the oddities of characters looking a good deal differently than you remember, because instead of caricatures, they look more like real people. Now, this means it's easy to instantly realize a character was 5, 10, maybe 15 years older than you originally thought. Like Tess, who looks like she went through a time machine the wrong way right before the game started. And the change there is large enough, I can't help but point it out that the events that actually happen feel a tiny bit different than they originally did, where the character appeared to be maybe in her mid-20s versus her, well, late 40s. Or Joel, who sometimes looks much older, but then strangely better in the new game, a dude whose face looked like it never chose the easy way out option in life. And because of the way that we react to stories told by different characters, this can slightly change the feel, which I'll get to in a second. Also, a number of locations in the game have really low resolution textures, like on books, debris, and TVs. But for just a moment, talking about the presentation as a whole, the one place where remakes are going to run into this issue is, like I said, with Tess, and even Ellie as well as Joel himself, where a story beat can feel wildly different if something happens to someone who's lived their life, or who in many ways looks as if they have their entire life ahead of them to live. This makes the game look much better, but feel a little bit different, even from the emotional or subconscious level. Seeing what appears to be some characters who feel dramatically different in age can lend more or less weight to a death or to them living. But then you see insanely improved facial features and emotions, and it's hard not to say, well, you know what, this does look better. But in the future, this is going to be something that we will see come up more and more when it comes to remakes and remasters, when it affects the feeling of characters in story and how large a drastic change can be if the storyline is this impactful. Now, what hasn't changed, though, is the game's amazing audio presentation.
So that worked out well. Okay, I'll go check out this side of the house.
Bill, somebody had the same idea.
Music. The soundtrack for Last of Us is still one of the best around, a mixture of all kinds of music, somber, battle music, though, that sometimes is nothing more than percussives just banging around to grow suspense, or larger pieces during cutscenes. It doesn't have a real style other than to say depressing post-apocalyptic video game style, and I like it. The sound effects, though, are improved. It's a massive step up. Even if you aren't using the 3D audio, this is impressive. Sound of glass breaking, cars getting hit, crumpling, water bouncing off the top of the trucks, and the reports of weapons sail around locations. Every single character and item are placed perfectly in the world if you have the right sound system. It's all too frequent that things like guns start to sound gamey in a lot of titles, like everyone's afraid to have them sound just as scary as they would be if someone was aiming one at your dome and fired a warning shot. But the crystal clear audio, both presented in third person as well as the different cutscenes, up close and the actions you take, let the environment sing. Smashing the last bit of board over someone's head crackles the wood into splinters you can actually hear flying around you, and you can easily flank enemies by sound alone, even in different rooms and on different stories. Incredible audio. And that, of course, goes for the voices as well. Really, the voices in this game have never come up as an issue. Everybody likes these guys, whether you even like the story or not. They did a great job. Joel always sounds like he's one bad moment away from cutting the lifeline, and Ellie goes between kid to grown up to kid in the same spot, just like someone would do if they found an arcade game in a tavern where they always wanted to play it, but then they had to watch Joel treat 6 intruders like Cordwood at a small town summer festival, just chopping through everybody. All the actors do a spectacular job. Personally, I got to bring this one up, though. My favorite, Earl Brown as Bill. He's the only guy in the entire gang that can make Joel look positively cheery. The dude's a survivalist that Joel knows, and they try to get his help. And his mannerisms, his realistic, open-eyed look into the darkness and the void, and how he lives through that are amazing. I love that actor, and that character knocks it out of the park. But does the game? Well, that's where we talk about fun factor. As a stealth game, Last of Us feels a bit better than it actually did, maybe due to the revamped AI systems. I noticed a bit more flanking, and it felt a little bit more alive, and you have the options to turn that up or down. The battles and engagements are all somewhat preordained in their own way of setup, but do fall into fractured moments of frantic gunfights with both you and the enemy flanking the same way on accident and meeting up in an alley when you thought you were sneaking up on each other, or the surprise attack when you're just strolling along in a cutscene. The Last of Us is a heavy game, and while not near as nihilistic as its sequel, which is probably the best Paxil advertisement I've ever seen, it's a heady stuff aimed directly at questioning both the player as well as Joel, as well as all the other characters as they move into the future darkly. So maybe not fun, but very entertaining. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system. Here's the problem. That price. This game fits into a weird area. It's got some more bugs, and it certainly does look better in a lot of places, and that 3D audio is amazing. But this is $70, man, and the remaster looks awesome. This is one of the problems with remasters and remakes when they come on a particular time. If you haven't played this game at all, and you have a PS5, yes, but if you've already played it, maybe not so much. The remaster, its direct competition looks amazing, and it's like $20. And we're at a time when the price of games are already really hard for a lot of people to hit, and this game is $10 more expensive. Yes, the lighting looks better, but there are noticeably some parts of this game that do not perform in the way that I would like. There was a couple FPS hits, and also the way different characters looked at times. It didn't really feel like they put as much work as they probably should have into some of the environment's textures as well. I did love the accessibility, but $70 is a high price to pay when on the same system you can get the remaster, which offers a lot of this for such a cheaper price. And this remake is just in that weird place. Joel is awesome to me in one kind of way. He's sort of the character, the dude that doesn't knock before walking in. He'll spend 20 minutes destroying all your life-saving booby traps just so he can walk and talk to you, and then doesn't put them back up so everybody can die. And I find those kind of characters hilarious. If there was ever a muse for bad times needed to create worse times, that's Joel. He is very much worth playing as a character at least once. The Last of Us Remake, it's a little bit like realizing that half of a sandwich feels like a full sandwich if someone takes a side without asking. You realize it once you see the overall price and you realize what else is out there to be offered and what you're really being asked to do. $70 is insane. Still means it's a good game. And if you haven't played it at all, it is worth getting. But if you have in any way, shape, or form, might want to wait for this one to drop a little bit in price. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the review. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Check out the channel. And as you guys know, most of my videos are getting demonetized despite no violence, no cussing. Well, some games have violence. They get demonetized. So, of course, Patreon is the best way to continue to have me give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with any kind of sponsored bullcrap. Check out that Discord. Jump in, play some D&D, hang out, talk about movies. We would love to have you. Peace out, and enjoy the rest of your week.